Class Struggle on the Radio.
But there is a trade-off, always has been, between freedom and equality. I favor more freedom, even if people may end up more unequal. Freedom is my moral principle.
That was Cliff May, March 27th. I was on a talk show recently with Cliff May, associate editor of the Rocky Mountain News and radio talk show host recently, and it became clear that he and I don't have very much in common. You see, I'm a socialist. May is a capitalist. I'm a state leader in the Communist Party USA, and May is becoming the National Communications Director for the Republican Party. May values freedom above all else. I value equality. But I value freedom too, just not May's kind. I got to wondering, why can't May and I come together on anything? He's not crazy or spiteful. He is passionate about his beliefs as I am about mine. May is a true believer in capitalism. He argues that wherever capitalism doesn't work, it's because of faulty government policies, government intrusion. He doesn't believe that capitalism is inherently unstable, nor does he acknowledge that people becoming more unequal necessarily creates instability, and that people will revolt against what they, rightly in my opinion, perceive as injustice.
So even if, as is true, Michael Eisner makes more than I can ever dream of making, every year, nonetheless, Michael Eisner has one vote. He is rich. He does have a lot more say over where he goes on vacation than I do. That's about it.
It seems to me that Eisner, the CEO of Disney, who makes around $2 million a year, really is free, where most of the rest of us aren't. People who work for a living are, in the end, slaves to their wage. We must make a living. Even if the job we do is repulsive, perhaps dangerous, insulting, or whatever, we still must make a living. Having the opportunity to quit and be unemployed, to search for months or years on end for a decent job, while lacking resources for food, shelter, or clothing, is not freedom. Working people are much more like slaves than we are like Eisner. However, it's the distinction between property rights and human rights where May and I really diverge. I think he would like it if I could reassure him that socialism is not a threat to property, which really means a threat to privilege. But I can't. It's just true that the socialist analysis is that the privilege inherent in the private ownership of the means of production, i.e. factories and large land holdings, is the real threat to human rights and to real freedom. Just because rich people can do as they like, move their money wherever they want, does not mean that the rest of us are free. More importantly, the freedom of capital to seek the greatest profit anywhere in the world is very often in direct conflict with human rights. So, while I cannot agree with May that one must choose between freedom and equality, I will concede that one must choose between the freedom of capital and human rights, including equality. Equality is my moral principle. The point that really drove me batty about May's ideas is his suggestion that Mussolini and Hitler were not supporting capitalism because they didn't fully respect private property. The part about this that I find most mystifying is that May is Jewish. He ought to be more aware of history. In the real world, which exists outside of and separate from May's fantasy world of property rights without class distinctions, fascism is a political tool of capitalism in crisis. In Italy, Germany, and Spain, the fascists came to power to protect the state which represented the interests of capitalists. And people like Cliff May, a Jew, and me, a communist, were exterminated.
It's not a dream world, it's a nightmare world because public control of the means of production means government control.
For all their protests, the ruling class is really afraid of democracy. Democracy means control of society by the people. Economics is just one part of society, the democratic control of which is required for any successful application of democracy more generally. Capitalists are, at the heart of it, anti-democratic because they think they know best how to run society. Property rights, their rights, above all else. Above and against the human rights of the rest of us. This fear of democracy goes all the way back to the beginning, you know. The people who wrote our Bill of Rights gave many more rights to property than to people. Madison, for example, knew that if ordinary people had power, they would vote for a fair redistribution of wealth, since all wealth is, in the end, a social product. Private accumulation is fundamentally unjust. The ruling class, then, and since, has gone to great pains to limit democracy, to keep working people from just voting for justice. I predict that Cliff May will be wildly successful in his new job. He's like a preacher for capitalism. However, I also predict that this system he worships won't be around all that much longer. Someday, hopefully soon, working people will run the country. Someday, democracy will triumph over the privileges of the owning class. I'm Richard Curtis.